I'm glad that you've joined us for our time of study. I'm Tim Smith with Sunday School University, and we continue in our study in the book of Proverbs. Get your Bible, get your outline, get your pen. Let's gather together and study God's Word. We're working on the lesson for Sunday, June the 28th. The title of this lesson is The Choice. The point of the lesson is this, that all people have a choice to make. That is, to follow God or to reject God. The Bible passage in this session, we see Solomon addressing the most important choice people will make in their life. That is, to follow God or to reject Him. Every person is confronted with the choice of whether to follow God in faith or to reject Him in disobedience. In these verses, verses 10 through 19, Solomon contrasted two distinct opposite ways of life. The way of wisdom and the way of the wicked. In verses 20 through 27, we'll see that Solomon pressed his sons to stay on the path of wisdom. So let's look at these. The path to take. Proverbs chapter 4, beginning in verse 11. He says, I'm teaching you the way of wisdom. I'm guiding you on straight paths. When you walk, your steps will not be hindered. When you run, you will not stumble. Hold on to instruction. Don't let go. Guard it, for it is your life. Here, Solomon declared that his aim was to guide people in the path of life. Verse 11. He says, I am teaching. The word teaching there is basically the word throwing. He says, I'm throwing something to you. And he's asking, are you going to catch it? Or better yet, he's saying, you better catch it. He says here in verse 11, he talks about the way of wisdom. Again, when he uses the way of wisdom or the word wisdom, he's talking about the appropriate application of knowledge. The use of knowledge as God intended it. And he says in verse 11, he talks about the straight paths. This path is one that is easy to follow, and it is not tricky. I guess what the best way to illustrate this is when you think about driving on a paved road, and the pavement has been there for years, and the reflectors in the road are gone, and the paint on the road has faded, and it's at night and it's in the middle of a downpour. You don't know which way the road, it's very difficult to see the road, and you're basically guessing that the road is right there. Solomon is saying that it's not that way with God's path, that it's very clear, it's very easy. It's not always easy to choose that, but we know where we're going. God's not trying to trick us. He's not trying to deceive us. That's what he's talking about with straight paths. In verse 12, he's talking about walking and running. And these are, of course, two different speeds of movement. And that's important. He's talking about walking. He's talking about the distant journey. He's talking about lifelong. He's talking about the rest of your life. And then he's talking about running. He's talking about the fast journey. He's talking about the daily routine. He's saying that both in the short term and the long term, that this thing with God is going to be something that's going to benefit you now and forever. And he talks about whether you're running or walking, today or 30 years from now, when you choose the right path, you will not be hindered and you will not stumble. He's talking about the obstacles on the journey, or the physical limitations. There are things in our life that are on the exterior. There are things in our journey that are on the interior. But he's saying that no matter what comes your way, you're going to have a way. And then in verse 13, he tells us to take a tight grip onto these truths. He says in verse 13 to guard. That is to keep watch, observing everything, investigating anything. He gives that soldier mentality when they are given the responsibility of the watch or to guard. They don't just go about that haphazard, but that they see everything and they investigate anything. He's saying guard, be intense, take a tight grip on these. And he says that there is life in these teachings, and that is true, both spiritually and physically. So he says, here's the path that you need to take. And then he says in verses 14 through 19, here's the path you need to avoid. He says, keep off, in verse 14, keep off the path of the wicked. Don't proceed on the way of the evil ones. Avoid it. Don't travel on it. Turn away from it. Pass it by. For they can't sleep unless they have done what is evil. They are robbed of sleep unless they make someone stumble. They eat the bread of wickedness. They drink the wine of violence. The path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, shining brighter and brighter until midday. But the way of the wicked is like the darkest gloom. They don't know what makes them stumble. He says you need to avoid the path of the wicked. In verse 14, he's warning against following the path of evil people and their appetite for wickedness, which leads to more wickedness. Again, it's a never-ending downward spiral. He gives 6 rapid prohibitions which communicate the urgency and the importance. It's a good parent saying, stay away, don't do. So it's 6 real quick, boom, 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 boom. Why? Because he's saying this is big deal. Talks about the wicked. What is that? Well, it's every type of disobedient behavior, including violence, dishonesty, and cruelty. The evil ones, those are the ones who hate God and hate God's ways. In verse 15, Solomon gives 4 warning signs on the road of life. Avoid it, don't travel on it, turn away from it, and pass it by. Get it? Don't go near it. In verse 16, he tells us that the wicked have become addicted to doing wrong. And he says that they suffer from insomnia when they don't commit some type of evil. They live and breathe to do evil and wickedness. Their greatest satisfaction is derived by making others hurt. That's the wicked. Don't be with them. Don't choose that path. Don't be like them. The wickedness and violence they do has become commonplace to them. And when he talks about they eat the bread and they drink the wine, he's saying that the stuff they do, the harm that they bring, the murder that they do, the things that they steal, the harm that they do has become commonplace to them. When they kill somebody, it's just like them eating a sandwich. In verse 18, Solomon interrupts his bad news with some good news. Verse 18, the path of the righteousness is like the light of dawn, shining brighter and brighter until midday. Here in verse 18, he talks about the righteous, those who have a right relationship with God, and they live according to His ways. And what's he talking about here when he says the path of the righteous is like the light of the dawn and shining brighter and brighter until midday? He's talking about that daily spiritual growth gets increasingly stronger as the believer walks with God each day on the way of righteousness. The sunrise is beautiful, but when the sun first comes up, it's only a little bit of light. But when you get to midday and the sun is in the middle of the sky and it's bearing down, it's brighter than it was in the morning. He's talking about spiritual growth. How do we have that in our life? We have that by following His way. And in verse 19, he gives the stark contrast of the bright light to the darkest dark. It's so dark you can't see your hand in front of your face. The darkness symbolizes the complete moral blindness of the wicked. We'll look at verses 20 through 27, and there we see the choice to make. He says, "My son, pay attention to my words. Listen closely to my sayings. Don't lose sight of them. Keep them within your heart. For they are life to those who find them and health to one's whole body. Guard your heart above all else, for it is the source of life. Don't let your mouth speak dishonestly. Don't let your lips talk deviously. Let your eyes look forward. Fix your gaze straight ahead. Carefully consider the path of your feet, and all your ways will be established. Do not turn to the right or to the left. Keep your feet away from evil." Here Solomon challenged his son to continually consider his counsel in verses 20 and 21. He's repetitive and he is deliberate. He's saying, pay attention, listen closely. In other words, come near, get close to me, learn, lean into what I am saying so that you can hear. He says about God's instruction, keep them near you and know them so that they can help you make good decisions. In verse 22, those who find them, the life of the wicked is haphazard, but the life of the righteous is purposeful. In verse 23, for the Jews during Solomon's time, the heart represented the seat of human volition. In other words, decision making. He's saying make good choices in verse 23. The choices that we make are life and death choices. In verse 24, our words have power, and what we say can be used for good or bad. God's people must be honest in their words and their actions. We have a choice to make. Verse 25, don't let the things of the world and the temptation of evil sidetrack you. He says in verse 25, let your eyes look forward. Fix your gaze straight ahead. He's saying don't let the world and the temptations of this world sidetrack you. In verse 26, where you go and what company you keep will influence your decisions, your choices, your words, your actions, and your attitudes. He says, carefully consider the path and your feet. He's talking about where you are, the places that you find yourself in, the people that you hang around. They're going to influence you. Don't be in bad places and don't be in bad company. In verse 26, he talks about, and your ways will be established. There in verse 26. That word established there is firm traction. That's so important, folks. We're not going to get traction. We're not going to make progress. We may even get stuck, we may even slip. We're not going to move forward in bad places and with bad company. Verse 27, the way of wisdom is straight and narrow. Do not turn to the right, to the left. Keep your feet away from evil. Any change in direction potentially takes one off the path and on the path of the wicked. That's why he's saying, stay here. Don't go there, but stay here. The only way to keep one's feet away from evil is disciplined, wise living God's way. So what are the points of these verses that we've looked at? What's a summary? Well, I've provided those three quick summaries of these passages that we've read in Proverbs. Number one, following godly instruction leads to life. Number two, wicked living leads to more wickedness and dissatisfaction. Oh, I'll just do it one time. No. It becomes easier every time we do it. Every time we take a step in evil, it becomes easier to take the next step until it becomes a habit, a lifestyle, and we see no way out. So don't get started in that journey. Number three, righteous living calls for disciplined living. What does that mean? Well, you got to make right choices. You got to say yes to God and no to evil. So you got to make the choice, but also one of the things that I've found about living a disciplined life is there has to be accountability. Who is holding your feet to the fire? Who are you accountable to? You got to have somebody in your life that's speaking truth. Someone that you're honest with that's helping you in this journey. So, this lesson is entitled The Choice. We all have a choice to make. Are we going to follow God or are we going to reject Him? As we think about this lesson and as we begin this, maybe a question to ask is this. What have been some of the obvious and easy choices that you've made this week? You know, our life is full of choices every moment. What are some choices that you've made this week? And then the obvious challenge application of this lesson is this. Have you made the decision to follow God? Have you surrendered to Him? Have you rejected self? Have you rejected evil and acknowledged that there is no hope in yourself apart from Him? Have you surrendered to Him? Have you made the choice to follow God? I would encourage you to do that and surrender to Him and say, your will, not mine. Well, we've all got a choice to make. I hope that your choice is to follow God. Well, I'll be praying for you as we gather this coming Sunday. God bless you.